This is StoryBeat, storytellers on storytelling. StoryBeat explores how artists and creators of all kinds craft their stories. So join us as we reveal how master storytellers develop and build brilliant stories that people the world over love and adore. Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. I'm Steve Cuden, coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm truly thrilled to have as my guest today one of the theater world's leading voices, the actor, director, writer, and producer Alan Stanford. First, a bit of background. Alan Stanford has been associated with the powerhouse theater company PICT Classic Theater here in Pittsburgh for the past 9 years. For the last 4 of those years, he's led the organization as its artistic and executive director. In the interest of full disclosure, I serve on PICT's board of directors. Though he was born in Liverpool, England, and grew up mainly on the Isle of Wight, Alan moved to Ireland in 1969 after touring there and eventually became an Irish citizen. He spent more than 30 years as a principal and leading actor with the renowned Gate Theatre in Dublin, where he also directed such box office, record-breaking productions as The Constant Wife and Pride and Prejudice. Alan also founded Ireland's Second Age theatre company that was dedicated to the production of the plays of William Shakespeare and other classic playwrights. During his time with PICT Classic Theatre, Alan has directed Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris, For the Tree to Drop, Great Expectations, Woman and Scarecrow, Blithe Spirit, Lady Windermere's Fan, Shirley Valentine, and Macbeth, to name but a few. And for PICT, he has performed such roles as Henry II in The Lion in Winter, Lady Bracknell in The Importance of Being Earnest, and Pozzo in Waiting for Godot, a role for which he is legendarily well known, having played it as it toured around the world for a number of years prior to Alan's moving to Pittsburgh. As a writer, Alan has successfully adapted numerous well-known stories into plays. These include Pride and Prejudice, Oliver Twist, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Jane Eyre. Recently, he's tackled a dramatic adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a story of which I know a little, having adapted it myself while writing the book and lyrics for the Broadway musical Jekyll and Hyde. Alan, what a truly great honor it is to have you on StoryBeat. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm exhausted listening.
Well, I was going to say, you certainly, I don't know what you do in your spare time, but you certainly don't have any.
No, I don't have a lot. I used to do gardening, but everything rotted, so I stopped that.
So we're going to talk about process today, about how you are a creative individual and how you do various things in your life. You have the great good fortune of having the freedom, the luxury to both, or all three, act, direct, and write, as well as produce and other artistic endeavors. For you, how different is your approach to acting, directing, and writing? Is it a very different thing for each?
Well, yeah, it's different in the sense that they are different disciplines. But I've always thought of myself, because I've now been, this year, I've been a professional actor for 50 years.
Is that all?
That's all. And I've always thought of myself as an actor. So I'm an actor who directs. I'm an actor who writes. I'm an actor who, acts. But all of it comes from that sort of fundamental base level of how I see what we do is from the viewpoint of being an actor. I mean, in that sense, how I see the world is from the viewpoint.
So you approach your directorial work from the actor's perspective.
From the actor's perspective, yeah. So I always try to think of myself as being the additional actor in the room. And I'm not, even though I have very clear concept about what I might want to do with the production if I'm directing it, it's not a question of me intellectualizing or saying, this is my concept, this is what I want you to do, follow this particular guideline, this particular pattern. I work on a much more one-to-one basis with the actors. But as I say, it's a different discipline, so in the back of the mind all the time, you've got that picture of where you want to lead it to. And what I've found from my experience is the picture I start out with is never the picture I end up with, because it's been influenced by the actors I've cast. And that's balanced by the fact that I've cast those actors. I've cast them for the production I want to do If it works well, everything comes together as a kind of unity. And if it doesn't work well, you get a terrible mess.
Well, one of the things that I like to emphasize when I'm teaching screenwriting and playwriting and so on is that acting, directing, and writing are sort of three sides of the same coin. You're all pulling towards telling the story. I mean, this is StoryBeat, and we're focused on the creation of story and how this works.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting that you, because you are an actor first, you approach the work from an actorial, if there is a word actorial, viewpoint. Do you approach the writing in the same way?
Yeah, very much so, because I don't write original plays. I've tried, and I find it very difficult. But I have built a sort of side career of doing adaptation, which in its way is playwriting, because it's like, one of my most successful was Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, and it's been done a lot in Ireland. It's been done in America. It was a very successful production of the Guthrie. But it's not Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It's Jane Eyre by Alan Stanford. What I did was take the themes and the characters and the relationships and take it from a novel form to a theatre form. So you might say I stole the plot. Well, Shakespeare stole every plot he ever used.
Tell me a writer that hasn't stolen every plot.
Everybody. I mean, we're about to do Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. 2,500 years, writers have been stealing that plot.
Sure.
So we all steal. It was Laurence Olivier, a famous quote saying, the clever borrow, the great steal. We all steal. We all steal from one another's because there are only so many plots. There are only so many relationships. It's the nuances between them that make theatre so fascinating.
It's the relationship of the characters to one another is what makes it great.
That's exactly it. So when writing, if I'm doing an adaptation, I may have certain actors in my head. They may never play the roles, but I have them in my head because I want to hear their voices saying those lines. I want to watch the way they move and the way they interact as I'm putting that dialogue together. So in that sense, that sort of interrelationship between acting, directing, and writing, it's very important, and it all comes down to for what to me is a very basic dictum. I was interviewed on the BBC once, a good while ago, doing one of our Beckett Festival things, and there was a group of directors, and we were all asked the same question: what is the function of the director? And what I said, I think, might have been the only purely original thought I ever had in the course of my life. But what I said was, it is the same as the actor. My job is to put the play into the witness box and keep asking it questions till it tells the truth. And that's it.
As a director, you are essentially the original audience before the audience comes in.
Precisely, yeah. I got to what, and that's another point. In terms of process, one of the great lessons I learned, and it was a producer I worked with for a very long time who was the director of the Gate Theatre in Dublin. As you mentioned, I worked there for a very long time. And he's just retired. And he's younger than me. God. But we were talking about this.
Do us a favor, don't retire too soon.
I'll try not. I wouldn't know what to do. The point he made, and we were doing a production, it was the first time we did the Pride and Prejudice that I adapted. And we got to dress rehearsal, and it just wasn't gelling. All the ingredients were right. It was a wonderful cast. It was a brilliant design. I think it was a good production, and the script wasn't bad, but it wasn't gelling. And we sat there after the dress rehearsal, and the actors had all gone, and we're sitting there and just looking at one another and saying, what the hell? And he said, I want you to try something. I said, what? He said, I want you to go home and think about what you've just seen as if I directed it, and you have to fix it. And it was a brilliant observation, because always when you're acting, when you're directing, and you know this, even when you're writing, you become so subjective. You become married to what you do. It becomes a relationship that is so intense and so close and so deeply personal. And anybody who's been married knows this. It's very difficult to put your finger on the things you don't like about the person you live with. But there are things. So
And
what
you do lose sight of the forest for the trees when you're in the weeds that deep.
So I now do that, and when we get to the stage, even earlier, when we get to the stage of run-throughs, and when we get to, even in tech rehearsal, and then as we get to dress rehearsal, I always try to watch it as if I didn't direct it, and it is my job to fix it. And amazing how often the editing scissors come out. How often you look at something and you think, why did I stage it that way? That's there's no truth there. And that's that same thing. You're searching. You're on that trajectory to find the truth, moment by moment by moment by moment.
So let's talk about how you get to there before you even get to casting or anything else. As an adapter of classic works, are you trying to take every line that you can find within the work, or are you making up your own based on your feeling of it?
Well, there's a bit of both there. Again, I once were. We all stand on the shoulders of masters, and I worked as a director. I worked with an Irish writer, a very famous Irish playwright called Hugh Leonard, who
he wrote Da, did he?
He wrote Da, yeah, and he was very well known for adaptation. He'd done a lot of adaptation for the BBC and what have you. And I'd known him donkey's years from when I was a much younger actor. And thing. But anyway, we said to him, we'd like to do a Dickens, and it was Great Expectations, which we staged in PICT a couple of years ago. And working with him, and he was very generous. He was also generous and lazy, in that once he realized I could do it, he'd say, "Well, you do that bit," and But anyway, at the end of the process, and it was a great success. And I said to him, I do want to do more of this, but I want your advice. I've seen text that you've sent me, but how do you get to that point? What's your secret? Expecting a very long lecture. And he said, it's very simple. You read the book. You read the book again. Maybe you read the book a third time. Then you throw the book away and you write a play. And he said, that play that you write will be dreadful. But what it will be the essence of the book that affected you enough for you to remember it. And it's true. When you're adapting a piece of literature, you're changing it completely from one form to another. And every time anybody who reads novels knows that you see the pictures. If it's a good novel, you're seeing it.
That is what a good novel or certainly a good screenplay should dictate that, but a novel for sure.
A novel for sure should do that.
A play as well.
Yeah, but that's the point. A play is both textual and visual. A novel implies a visual. If you do that, and I've done it, I've proven that he was right, that first play you write is really bad. But it gives you a framework to then go back to the novel and say, what was that? What about that attracted him? And you usually find something much better in the novel. And you translate from the written word to the spoken word. Because remember, and you know this, when we write a play, we are not writing the written word. We are writing the spoken word.
Absolutely.
And what works well as a piece of literature, as a phrase or a sentence or a speech, doesn't necessarily work well as a spoken. We have two languages. We have a written language and we have a spoken language, and they are different.
I say to my students all the time, and that as we're critiquing their work, I'll write in the margins on their work SiFN, which is Richard Walter, who's my professor from UCLA, used to write SiFN, which means save it for your novel.
That's exactly it.
Because it's not something to be spoken. It's not something that's going to translate onto the screen or to the stage or wherever.
I remember when we did Pride and Prejudice, and there was something missing, and it was finding that first moment of her realization that she loved him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually there in the novel, absolutely crystal clear. She falls in love with Darcy because of Pemberley, his house. That when she looks at his house, she realizes that everything about that house is everything about Darcy. Taste, character, style, generosity, warmth, everything. So she's falling in love with the man through the house. So I went back to the book, and I took that whole chapter of her walking through the house and reduced it to 20 lines of a speech, less, 15 lines of a speech. And we walked her through it. And then suddenly Darcy appears, not coming out of a swimming pond like the BBC series, but just appears through a doorway. And they look at one another. And because you've established that, the look replaces the other 50 lines of speech.
Well, there's nothing better than a visual.
A visual will always work. A visual does it all the time. Shakespeare does it. For somebody who wrote an awful lot of words, Shakespeare provides you with the opportunity for visual.
But very little stage direction.
Very little stage direction, yeah. He'll say enter Romeo and leave it up to you to decide whether Romeo's on a bicycle or not. It's although I did once have Friar Lawrence enter on a bicycle.
I'm curious, all right, so once you've done this, you've read the book 3 times or 4 times, whatever, and then you write your first terrible draft, which is, by the way, typical of every first draft. There's always what we call a puke draft, a vomit draft, or whatever you want to call it. It's always junk. And then you stage it, right? You bring your actors in, you stage it. Do you always then go back to the book?
Yeah, well, I don't give them the first puke draft, as you beautifully put it. I will go back to the book, and I will start to build up a working text. I will then bring in a group of actors, and we will sit, and we will read, and we will talk. And I don't want to I don't want to look at the words. I want to hear them. And that's why you need actors to come in and read those words. And actors will tell you very quickly, I can't even speak this. And it's not dialogue, it's just still literature. But working that process, working with actors, and you start to hear it and you start to build the shape of it in your mind, and you get to the point when you have a working rehearsal script. Then you go into the rehearsal process. And that is cruel, because you find you're rewriting and reworking and building. Because actors, I maintain this, and I said this at a seminar in Dublin once, and got into terrible trouble with a writer who I liked very much, and he liked me, but he didn't speak to me for about 6 months, and that was Brian Friel, who because I said we must accept, it must be an accepted fact, that the center and heart of theatre is the actor. I said, you can take a script, and the unfortunate thing, Brian was in the audience, and unfortunately, what the script I pulled out of my bag was a Brian Friel script. And I held it up and I said, this is not a play. This is a script.
It's a blueprint for a play.
It's a blueprint for a play. You can add actors to it, and it becomes a rehearsal. It's still not a play. You can add costumes and light and scenery, and it's still not a play. It is a dress rehearsal. A play happens when actors act and an audience watch and react.
Well, Aristotle, that guy from 2,700 years ago in Greece, he said in order to have a complete work, you have to have a source, a message, and a receiver. So the source is you, the writer. The message is the play or the whatever the work is, and you need an audience. You need a receiver, or it's not complete.
And that's why I like the fact that we call it play, because it is exactly that. It is a game played between the actors and the audience. And we all know that phrase, the willing suspension of disbelief, which is what we ask from the audience.
Every time.
But we ask it from the actors as well. Because when the actors walk onto the stage, they must willingly suspend their disbelief in the fact that they are simply playing characters. They must inhabit that imaginary world. And it is an imaginary world, and part of our brains on stage is saying, my God, that didn't go down well tonight, or where the hell's that prop, or something else, or I wish that person had stopped coughing in the 5th row. You're conscious of all of that, but at the same time, you are still within that framework of the game of theatre, and it's a game of two teams, the performers and the audience. And unless that game is played properly according to the rules and well, a play does not take place. That's it. And it's that same thing that I mentioned earlier. It's always that constant search for what is truth, not our truth, because theatre isn't true; it's a game. But what is truth, the essence of what we're attempting to demonstrate.
Would you say it is truth, or would you say it's the perception of truth?
Well, truth is an absolute. You can't have a bit like the word fact.
Or alternate fact.
There's no an alternate fact is fiction, and a partial truth is not truth. Now, how we perceive truth, each and every one of us, is to do with our own experience. We are, another acting phrase, we are the sum total of our own experience. Therefore, what you perceive as truth, it may not be the same as what I perceive as truth, but for me, it is truth. It's not nearly truth because yours is different. It is truth. And every truth is to do with an emotional, I don't want to use the word spiritual, because that implies something else, but it is an emotional reaction within the imagination. If you like, you could say where personal truth resides, we only perceive anything. The whole world, whatever they say about female intuition, it's not. But there are 5 senses, 5 ways that we can perceive the world. We can hear it, we can taste it, we can touch it, we can smell it, and we can see it. And if you can't be in contact with the world through those 5 senses, or a combination, you have no information coming into your brain. The information comes in, and I believe that it is the imagination that interprets it. It is through our imagination, our consciousness,
our point of view, our perception,
all of those things. We see what we see. And those things for which have particular truth for us are a distillation of that information. And that truth may be beautiful and it may be ugly, but it is extreme. So that, you may have begun your life by hating broccoli, and you may go to your grave hating broccoli because it has become a truth to you that broccoli is an evil spawn of hell.
And yet some of us like broccoli.
Yeah, because that's a different truth.
Okay, so let me ask you what you think makes a story good. What attracts you to a story?
It's one of those great. In fact, I was reading about that recently concerning movies and the dreaded sequel thing. That what attracts me to a story, what attracts me to a play or a movie or a novel or anything else, must be the humanity of the characters. It's got to be about people, not making up people, not machines, nothing like that. It's got to be about a sense of the humanity of a character. And you'll notice that just about every movie that's ever made about robots, they're very human.
Well, yes, people are not terribly interested in watching stories about inanimate things.
No, it's boring. So when people write stories about a dog, like Lassie, or about a dolphin or a porpoise called Flipper, or about a kangaroo called Skippy, or
a robot called Wall-E.
Wall-E. They've got incredibly human characteristics.
Absolutely.
What makes a story is human character, the human nature. And what makes a successful story is that human nature has more than one side to it. Let's take an example. I just mentioned Jane Eyre. Everybody loves Jane Eyre because she's such a sweet person and she's so loving and kind and generous, but she's also very prejudicial. Mm-hmm. and unforgiving in many ways. And that's what makes her interesting.
It makes her conflicted. It makes us feel conflicted about her.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it compelling.
Yeah.
Without that sense of conflict, it's rather dull and uninteresting.
And that's the second point: humanity and conflict.
Conflict.
There must be conflict. The phrase because for theatre to work, for literature to work, for movies to work, we must have the capacity, we must have the opportunity to laugh at our fears and cry at our delights. And that's really what it's about.
That's an interesting phrase. Laugh at our fears and cry at our delights.
Because that's human nature. If somebody walks up to you, and I remember it because it happened to me when I was told my dad died, and the first thing I did was laugh. Because you want to reject that notion immediately, and therefore it must be a joke.
Wow.
Our human reaction to tragedy very often is to try to laugh it away. When somebody comes, if somebody came up to you,
we call that gallows humor, right?
Yeah. But if somebody came up to you and said you just won the Powerball and you're now $480 million the richer, you'd start to cry. You will, because joy brings on tears. Because what's suddenly happening in you when you get a joyous piece of news is relief, that you are relieved from a pressure. It lets things, and any relief from pressure it makes us cry. That's one of the magics of theatre, that when you can make an audience laugh at their fears and cry at their delights, you've got really good theatre going on.
Yeah, I believe that for sure. What inspires you today? What were your early inspirations? What got you to do what you started to do as a young man? And what inspires you today? The same things or different things?
Yeah, I think it's always the same things, but they pass through generations, and therefore they become tempered by life. I mean, I decided I wanted to be an actor when I was in high school, and I don't know why. I just knew that's what I wanted to be. Do high school plays.
There was no intellectual process that you went through to make that decision.
No. It was because I think the best way to say it would be that I was crap in school. I mean, I was a very moderate
get in line
student. Yeah. But then I started doing. I had there was a teacher, and he used to do plays, and he put me in plays, and suddenly I just found something that I could do. And that, as I got older, made me start going back to re-educate myself and to read and to investigate and discover. I got a far better education after I became an actor than I did before. And I wanted to be an actor. That's all I wanted to be. And I remember when I was in theatre school in London.
Where did you go to school?
I went to the Guildhall.
Okay.
And I used to go sometimes twice a week, and to the cheap seats way up in the gods in the Old Vic and watch Laurence Olivier act. And that was my god.
That's pretty impressive stuff.
And I learnt more watching him probably than by doing anything else. And a few others of my generation, we still talk about it. We wanted to be him. Because when you're young, you want to be the greatest actor and a star and all of those things. And then life has a wonderful way of saying, nah, not for you. But I think I never made any money, 50 years, never made any money. But I always loved the notion of what theatre does. I just loved the magic of what theatre does. And then I began to branch out, and then I would sort of be, from a very early, even in theatre school, I was directing. So I did both in parallel all the way through my career. I had a passion for Shakespeare. I suppose you would describe me as a classicist by nature.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, you know me well enough.
I do.
I had a passion for Shakespeare. I had a loathing for artificial Elizabethan-isms. So I've always had a passion for Shakespeare as a modern playwright, and for the Greek playwrights as modern playwrighs.
They really haven't. They're still in style.
Oh yeah. Well, this is the thing. As I got older, and you get more associated with different theatre forms and different theatre types, and then I was blessed by the fact that I got into the Beckettian school by the fact that back in
Let's be clear what Beckettian means.
Of Samuel Beckett.
Thank you.
Only two playwrights, I think, in the modern age have made it into the Oxford English Dictionary: Beckettian and Pintoresque. Beckett and Pinter. And I've been blessed in my life that I had so much association with the works of both of those writers, and the fact that I knew Harold Pinter and I directed him and I worked with him. But the association with Beckett, which really began in the 80s, to the point where we at the Gate we first staged that production of Waiting for Godot, and then went on to we were the first theatre, I think, professional theatre ever to do a complete retrospective of the works of Beckett. and travelled the world with Godot and with others in Endgame as well.
Did you do Crap's Last Tape?
I did Crap's Last Tape, but not in that season. But we got more and more, and the more and more I worked on Beckett, the more it developed me, I suppose. Down the line, I'd always been thinking, which is that I'm a minimalist, that I believe that it is the actor and the audience, and you put as little as possible between them. Let the actor carry the text to the audience as something that is alive. So therefore, I tend to be minimalist in my approach to the way I will do anything.
Uninflected? Would you say that uninflected or lacking inflection is the way to go for an actor?
No, I think that's too extreme an injunction. But I think simplicity is a better term, and it's simplicity in staging and simplicity. Tell the truth. And the great thing I learned from working on Beckett and on Pinter as well, because Pinter was a brilliant exponent of the principle that it is existential, in the sense that it is in the moment. There is nothing before the moment and nothing after it. It is only the moment that we are in. And that is true of life. I don't know the next question you're going to ask me, therefore I have no way of preparing for it.
I'm waiting for it to come in now.
We don't know what life will offer. A bus could come through that window and we're all dead in 5 seconds. We don't know. So you can only live in the moment. You can have plans, you can have dreams, you can have wishes and desires, but life only happens moment by moment by moment, and in the next moment you're dead.
And it's sometimes troubling for some humans. They live in the past, which is not good either.
You learn from the past, but you don't live in it. The past is merely everything repeats, nothing is new under the sun, but it's get back to the word again, it is the truth that we have drawn from it that helps us to inform what we do in this moment. And that's true of art as much as it's true of science, as much as it's true of agriculture. If you learn that if you plant potatoes in that field and it floods every year, they're going to rot. So you learn from that fact and you go and plant it on higher ground. You don't keep repeating. If it doesn't work and it keeps not working, don't do it again.
Well, what's the definition of insanity? Is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result.
Yeah. So we learn our life teaches us how to live in the moment, and that can give us an expectation of the future and a hope of the future. But we have no guarantee. The only guarantee we have is that we have this moment.
Well, okay, so you've been doing this a very long time, as you've already said, and I've said. How do you keep it fresh? What do you do? What do you do in your performance life, your non-directorial life, to replenish the well, to make the creativity still grow?
I wish I had an easy answer to that. I don't know. I get tired more now, but then I'm getting on, and you can't help it. In spite of what I've just said about the past, you can't help the past being there. And the longer you do something, the more past you have. I've got a 50-year history of, you read out a small sample of it. I think the way you get fresh or keep it fresh, especially if you are, and I'm an unapologetic classicist and I'm an unapologetic minimalist. I think the way you keep it fresh is that you have to come back to that other word, rehear. We rehearse. We rehear it. You've got to have the capacity and the self-discipline. I've directed certain plays several times. I've acted in certain plays several times. And let's take Waiting for Godot. I played Pozzo on and off in that same production with those same other actors for 20 years. And not once, and I can say this absolute confidence, not once did it become stale. And it didn't become stale because we entered into that discipline of this is the first night. and we are just going to take it moment by moment.
It helps that it's maybe the greatest play ever written.
That does help, yeah. And it also helps that the guy who directed us for all those years was a guy called Walter Asmus from Frankfurt, who was Beckett's personal assistant and worked with him for many, many years. But it was that note, and I think that's true, that exercise of that particular play is true about everything else you do. It's not that you don't repeat yourself, because we always repeat ourselves. It is that you re-examine, you learn from the past, and you say, okay, that worked, but I didn't try that. Let's try it and see what happens. And you constantly review what you've done, why you did it, why it could have been better, and you're constantly seeking for a better way into it. It's keeping your imagination fresh.
And in that line, I'm going to guess that over time you've certainly seen some odd and unusual rehearsal preparations or people preparing to go on stage in a performance. Can you tell us some of the more unusual or interesting preparations?
I mean, I remember I'm not naming names, there was one actor I remember, he was Irish, it didn't matter, but became quite really very successful. And his rehearsal preparation in terms of warm-up, I don't know how he had the energy to go on stage and act, because he did nearly a 2-hour physical and vocal warm-up that would have exhausted me, and he did it day after day after day. And he wasn't that great. You know, actors should be warm before they go on. They should prepare. They should be limber, and their voices should be warm, although I've got to the point nowadays when, for me, vocal warm-up is 2 cigarettes and a good cough. But
you need the cough to clear it out.
Yeah, you got to get the phlegm up, you know. But I've seen in terms of rehearsal technique, actors who have done so much preparation before they walk into the rehearsal room for the first reading, that they know more about the play, the history of the play, the nature of the character, and everything else, and their mind is locked down, and that's no use to anybody. I don't care how much research you do, you come into rehearsal with an open mind. So people who will do that much research and preparation to the point where everything is locked down, then start acting in a bubble, because all they're doing is acting what they've considered without listening to what anybody else has to offer. So I'm a great believer that any warm-up process, if a company is going to do it, they should do it together. They should do it as a team, because before any performance, it is far better. I do it by talking to everybody when I'm acting. I talk to everybody in the cast. I go around, talk to them. I interrupt them. I screw up their own prep, because my prep is to talk to them. So that when you walk onto that stage, you are a team and you are a unit, and you're listening to one another. And you are, it's no good just walking in, putting on your costume, walking into the wings, going onto the stage, and trying to act with somebody you haven't seen for 24 hours. Doesn't work. And
the listening part of it is really the key to it all,
yes.
isn't it?
Listening
and
is
it's
everything.
not hearing, it's listening.
Listening.
Because listening is active, hearing is passive.
And you can see that when people act. Actors who just hear, there is always that little momentary beat between one actor's line and the next one. I'm not talking about pauses or silences, which I've lived with Beckett and Pinter for years. It is that momentary beat where he's heard, it's my line. And it's somewhere in the back of the head. When it is fluid, when it is exciting, when it is electric, it is because the actors are listening to one another. They're not thinking, what am I going to say? They're listening and responding. And it's such a tiny thing, but when it is right, when actors are listening to one another, they are then playing the moment.
That's right in the moment.
That's
then.
In the moment.
And how many times would you say in your career you have felt as a group, you've been on stage with a group of actors, and you were all working on all cylinders like that?
I suppose a fair amount. But it is perfection is a very hard thing to achieve in theatre, because it's
and
full
repetitively.
It's very hard. But there was, I was talking about it the other day actually to a couple of my actors for Oedipus, and I was saying there was, when we did Godot and we were touring, and it was in China, one night in Shanghai. Sounds like a song, but one night in Shanghai, and we'd been doing the play at that stage probably 15 years. And one night, just one night, in front of a mixed Chinese-European audience in a theatre, the Arts Theatre in Shanghai, on a very rainy night, we got it. And for the first time in all the times we did it, when we walked off stage, we'd normally walk off saying, that was good, I like the way you did that, it was interesting tonight, and you'd be chatting. And the four of us just went in silence to the dressing room. And we knew if there was a performance where every moment was inhabited, that was it.
And it's stuck in your brain this whole time.
Yeah, I always remember it, because it is rare. Theatre is an imperfect art form, but it is the best. People will shoot me for saying that, but I'm only quoting Oscar Wilde.
All right, well, we're actually coming toward the end of the podcast, which has just been fantastic. I've learned so much just listening to you here today. I'm just wondering if you have any piece of advice or a tip that you would like to impart upon not only our listeners, but in particular our younger listeners who are up and coming and trying to make their way or make a break or whatever it would be in any of the theatrical arts.
I think you've got to believe in yourself, because in any art you are doing something that is so deeply, profoundly personal. The hardest thing for any artist is that first time you show the art to another person. Everybody, infinitely more people write poetry than will ever expose themselves as poets. The amateur painter, the amateur, even the acting, you've got no choice because you can't act without an audience. And the greatest advice was given to a friend of mine, an actor who did start to paint and became a very good artist, was paint as though no one will see it. Because then it's true. If you're going to be an artist in any walk of life, and especially in theatre, you have the old axiom, to be an actor, you have to have the soul of an angel and the skin of a rhinoceros. You are going to be criticized. You are going to be told you're not good. You are going to be told it doesn't work. You're going to be told you will fail. And you will. And the best advice, I think, is that of Samuel Beckett to an actor who said, I try to do what you want, I try to do what you seek, and I keep failing. And Beckett's response was, try again, fail better.
That is just beautiful. Alan, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you.
This has been a true delight and a very powerful bunch of information for us to chew on. So thank you very much for coming today.
And thank you for having me. I always love talking.
Today's StoryBeat tip of the day. Successful writers are asked this question all the time. Where do you get your ideas? My friends, the following may sound obvious or simplistic, but the best places to find killer ideas are anywhere and everywhere. Finding ideas is easy. Ideas are a dime a dozen, and basic plots are common. It's the execution of a story that counts. Grand ideas can be found in books, newspapers, magazines, on TV, in other movies, online, while eating in a restaurant, and in your dreams. Sources for ideas are limitless. Your job as a writer is to stay open and alert to the siren call of a great idea, which may be a short-lived event in your consciousness. Most kinds of stories have already been told. The truth is that there really aren't any new basic storylines. Your job as a writer is to look for fresh angles, new slants, and untried combinations of older ideas and genres. You must create unique characters in conflict with other unique characters. What matters to your audience is how you reveal the experiences of a fresh and unique character who seeks to reach or resolve a compelling goal while overcoming endless obstacles and conflicts created by other unique characters. This podcast would not have been possible without the tremendous support of the Center for Media Innovation of Point Park University. Special thanks go to Ashley Murray for her tireless assistance in helping to put this program together. And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.